Everyone, this is Doug Custon, and you're listening to the WeWFM podcast, which aspires to be the go-to source for all things workforce management. Today, I'm speaking with Ian Lasplace, founder of Longreach Recruitment, which is a boutique recruitment agency based in the United Kingdom that specializes in workforce planning and data analytics roles. Today, we discuss what Ian looks for in great workforce planning professionals when he's sourcing for a role, the general updates on the job market, and finally how Ian has seen the profession evolve over the last 2 decades. I really enjoyed this episode. I hope you do too also. For those listening today, myself and Ian go back, way back, and quite honestly, I would say he's one of the people that have had the biggest impact on my career personally. Also something I'm sure that thousands of other resource planning professionals would also have to say about Ian as well, those that he's placed in the various roles. Really, really great to have you in. I think it's a long time coming. I tried to grab you for a blog years back, but you're always so busy. You're always on the sharp end of our profession in terms of workforce management, and busy, I guess, in the last few months as well with the post-pandemic, or if we can call it post-pandemic, rehiring in workforce management communities. Ian, great to have you.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. Really nice, as always, to catch up with you. And you're right. I think we've probably talked around and danced around getting together and doing blogs or interviews. It's nice to finally do something. And you're right, it has been incredibly busy, I think, for everybody within the workforce management space at whatever organisation or sort of wherever you're based geographically. It's this calendar year so far has been a real crazy time from not just a hiring point of view, but I think probably a focus on how do we do things better, smarter, and God forbid, we don't have another situation of lockdowns. And
we all hope that.
Yeah. But, I suppose we've now got some contingency and some experience of it, which, isn't a great thing, but it's there should it ever need to be adopted again.
Ian, I guess before we sort of go any further in terms of this particular topic, which I do want to touch upon, I think we probably should introduce you. There's many in the UK, at least, that are going to really know who you are. You stood in front of the workforce management community in hiring or helping to hire organisations to hire workforce management professionals for, was it 25 years?
Yeah, well, thanks for that, Doug. It's just short of that, actually, about 20.
Short of that?
We're almost heading there, quarter of a century, I suppose, yeah.
Could you, so for those listeners, could you tell a bit about yourself, what part of the world you're in, and what your connection to workforce management is?
Yeah, sure. So I live and work in Brentwood, which is around, 25 miles outside of London. I've been a recruiter since 1994. My first role was recruiting in the medical sector, which kind of evolved to recruit orthopedic surgeons, then with a further subspecialism in replacement and reconstructive surgery. So quite a niche discipline, which I thoroughly enjoyed. And then after that, I was in the city in London, recruiting, I guess, support staff and project-based professionals for the big four consulting firms and sort of corporate banking and lending institutes, really. It was 99, I actually joined two ex-colleagues, and we launched our own recruitment practice, which was very much focused on what was then called the call centre industry, which was super interesting, super buoyant back then, really, really busy, real emerging sort of growth area in terms of sort of customer contact. If memory serves me right, I think our first resource planning role came in that first year back in late 99. And I suppose I handled that assignment. We'd never heard of that role before. And I guess that
people in the profession probably do.
Yeah, absolutely. It was all team leader, call center manager, customer service manager, ops director, all the operational functions. But planning, really, we'd never come across. We'd never heard of it. It was a really good client actually at the time. So I took that assignment, and I guess it really did kickstart a bit of a passion and certainly a professional interest in what is now, I suppose, what are the phrases? Workforce optimization, workforce management, resource planning, labour planning, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I will remember that very first assignment quite fondly because I did fill it actually. But what it did was open up, I guess, an opportunity to do something different in a niche that was untapped or unknown of, certainly by most general recruiters that perhaps were working in the call centre space, as it was called then.
Well, first of all, I'm glad that you did fill it, because maybe it would have taken you down a completely different path.
Yeah, quite possibly. Let's never do that again. This is all.
And I touched upon this in the intro, but Ian has been a huge influence on my career as well. In that, I think what you placed me in the first 3 senior roles that I had when I came back from Singapore to the UK, and I think had it not been for Ian, maybe my career also might have taken a completely different path outside of workforce management. So I have Ian to thank for keeping me around the workforce management circles for all these years.
Yeah, well, I remember that very, very well, because I think you were still in Singapore at the time.
Yep.
And we connected on LinkedIn, and I think we set up based on time differences, we set up a call, which was just a dead easy one. I think, we hit an instant sort of rapport and understanding of each other. And the hiring client at the time, I knew all the guys in that team really, really well. And if I remember rightly, that was the first time they'd ever done or entertained an online or a video.
Yep.
It was just unheard of. It just didn't really happen unless you were an Apple or an Amazon or a Google, and you had a hiring manager stateside and a candidate in Europe, and then that would happen. But I won't mention the company, but it was an insurer, and it was kind of like, well, we can't do it because he's not here. Hang on a minute. Let's get real. We've got a guy that's super. You've got to have the conversation. And luckily they took the advice. You guys spoke, and it all kind of moved through the gears pretty quickly, didn't it? Which was lovely.
They had to kind of figure out how to get Skype onto a PC. I think that's like yeah,
you're making us sound like dinosaurs, Doug.
Well, I do feel like a dinosaur these days. That's for sure. Yeah. But yeah, they're interesting times. Doing virtual interviews even before kind of like it's become a commonplace now over the last 2 years. But back then, yeah, it was a real novel thing. And I think the first time I actually met my then to be manager was signing of the contract when I came over. Everything else was done completely virtual, which was really unique experience for me for sure.
Yeah, and like you say, and now it's second nature. In the last 2 years, whether it's professional or personal, it's been the way we've been able to still connect with everybody that we work with, to conduct our business and to keep in touch with our loved ones. So it seems funny, doesn't it, that was an innovation back then, which still wasn't widely adopted for many, many years after. So, well, I think we can safely say we were pioneers.
I mean, you touched upon this a little bit a few moments ago when you sort of mentioned the myriad of different names: resource planning, workforce management. I'm sure there's probably others. You've got all the real-time roles and these types of things that also go in there as well. No doubt that makes it quite complicated when you're searching for a new candidate for a particular role. But what, in your own words, how would you phrase workforce management? When you're sort of talking to maybe an organisation that is fairly new in terms of this type of role? I know you've placed a few in those. How do you describe that type of role?
Well, I guess, you're right. There are a myriad of titles and functional discrepancies on how things are described. And there's quite a lot of misnomers as well. You'll see a functional job title, and what it will actually require as a skill set is vastly different to what the role is called. But I suppose that from a holistic view, my description of workforce management is it's the practice and process of ensuring the right number of people available at the right time with the correct skills and knowledge to meet, hopefully, the correctly predicted demand from the customer. So it's a really simple headline, isn't it? Really, right people, right place, right skill, right time. I think in reality, we all know, anybody that's involved in workforce management knows that it's so much more complex than that, because there's so many moving parts and it's so dynamic. and you've got that sort of, that loop of activity, the modeling, the forecasting, cap planning, demand profiling, your scheduling, your optimization of that, and the adherence issues, the real time to make sure on day, new day is as good as it can be. And then sort of, the post analysis, and then sort of the improvement or enhancement initiative. So yeah, it's a toughie, isn't it? And I think I've heard you over the years kind of say, my family still don't get what I do, as workforce management. And it's exactly the same for me. And people just kind of say, oh, you recruit, what do you recruit for? And I hate the question. Sort of try to explain it, and they kind of listen intently, and they seem really intelligent. And then they say, oh yeah, we get it. So it's IT recruitment. And I kind of go, oh, God, I'm losing the will to live. Yeah, that's exactly what I do. I'm an IT recruiter. Now let's move on.
It's well. That was the reason why I put the blog together, was to try to help. One of the reasons to help explain to my mother at the time, what do I do for a profession? It didn't work, and here I am with a podcast. So I guess I'm still trying to crack that. But that's certainly a big ambition for us. And we find in Europe as well that it's almost maybe 5 or 10 years on the whole, say outside of the Netherlands. In terms of the understanding of workforce management, is still relatively basic. It's like going back sometimes 10 years compared to, say, the UK.
Yeah.
I think certainly I've seen a big shift in terms of the types of people that are coming into workforce management careers, or people that are excelling compared with where you were sort of 2 decades ago. When you search for a great workforce manager, what skills do you look for the most valuable today? And have you seen that change over the last 2 decades as I have?
It's a great question, yeah. And undoubtedly, sort of post-pandemic, I suppose there's definitely a shift. And I suppose if we sort of talk a little bit first around maybe the soft skills, which I've always been a fan of. I think throughout my career in recruitment, whether it's planning or, project managers or medical professionals before that, I think the most engaging candidates that I've loved working with have always had a consistent thread of they're bright. And that doesn't necessarily mean they're academically bright, but they're not bright, but they're sharp. They're curious, intellectually curious, practically curious. They like to understand what they do and take it to the next level. I think a real sort of hiring trait people would be really well served to follow is find those people that have got empathy, that have a degree of emotional intelligence, where they may not know a technical or a numerical answer to everything, but actually they can communicate what they don't know, and they can build that trust, which I think is vital in all walks of life and relationships, whether they're professional or personal, to get the job done and to solve problems. So, and I think post-pandemic, I think customers and employees have definitely had a mind shift, that they want to be in a place of work that is genuinely flexible, not post-pandemic, which would be a client saying, yeah, we have a flexible work policy, but it really wasn't. And there was nothing documented, and it was very piecemeal, and it would be, well, okay, you're having a fridge delivered Friday morning, so look, why don't you work from home, but we want to see you here in the afternoon. So I think the expectation now is, we all know globally working from home works. And in many instances, and it's well documented, there's been an increase in productivity, and there's been a lowering of sickness, because you know what, you might wake up and you don't feel particularly great. It's a different scenario to walk up a flight of stairs into your home office as it is to get up, get in your car, drive to the station, jump on a packed train, and it's just the thought of it is going to kind of go, you know what, yeah, maybe today is the day I kind of call in sick, because I'm just mentally not ready to deal with all of that. So I think, yeah, your question was, what do I look for in the skills? I think the soft skills, definitely. As a recruiter, if you're worth your salt, you can find the skills. I think trying to find a strong cultural or personality alignment with a candidate to an organization is probably the magic dust, really.
I think that's interesting, because I've noticed that as well. The technical skills, they're still important, but they're almost like, I think the best way to compare it would be that you can go and get a degree today, but without the experience, it means nothing.
Correct. Yeah.
And it's almost taken for granted that you have a degree. Like, okay, great, but I don't, take too much credence over that now. And I think with the technical skills, it's almost taken for granted that you have it. But if you want to be really great at workforce management now, you need to be able to translate that technicalities into something that people can buy.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's where that empathetic thoughts that you just mentioned there, the soft skills, the ability to communicate, I think almost become as important, maybe even more important than the technical skills, because what technology for some degree is help to reduce the technical ability that you need to have. Like we go back 25 years ago, there's a lot more manual planning done, modeling and such like this. Today, you've got the technology at your fingertips to be able to do that. It's even accelerating with AI, right?
Absolutely. I think AI, ML, and machine learning, all the big players are building that into that platform. And I don't think it will replace human intervention and knowing what's happening locally on the ground and what nuances are going on, all that kind of stuff. But there is no doubt that intelligent learning and its application, certainly in workforce management, it's going to be quite interesting, because I think, we have this conversation, Doug, in 5 years' time. It's a different skill set, and maybe it's even a different type of requirement. And I kind of genuinely feel, with AI and machine learning really escalating, the role of a planner in 5 years' time maybe won't be so much around, can you build me a forecast model over X amount using historical data and your trend analysis, because I think all of that will be done, and it will be done in a nanosecond. Data feeds are accurate and they're regular. So I think the work of a planner is probably likely to be more around the engagement and the influencing and understanding corporate goals and strategy, and it's almost guiding workforce management components to say, this is where we want to be, how do we get there, and what do we need to deploy that, and what are our milestones. I don't know how you feel, because your last couple of jobs have been with sort of high tech, high growth. You're probably more at the cutting edge of seeing this than perhaps I am, maybe.
Yeah, I think that I've definitely seen a shift. I look at the role that I'm currently occupying today. We've brought in technology that, okay, we haven't yet got it fully up and running, but the idea definitely is to lower the barrier in terms of the technical ability that you have to have in role. And I think I can only see that changing over time. And when people talk about, should I be worried about my job in workforce management because of AI and technology that's coming, I would say no. You need to pivot and shift the way that you work. And if you haven't already done that anyway, I would say that you're missing a big trick anyway, because workforce management lives and dies by your ability to be able to disseminate information and translate that into something workable, and then be able to communicate it out to stakeholders to be able to make decisions and buy in. And that's something that, at least today anyway, AI isn't capable of doing it. Let's see in 20 years' time. But
absolutely. And I think one constant in planning or workforce management, the one constant thing is that things don't stay still ever. And I suppose that's one of the reasons I've really been so interested in the work that I do, is that there is always a new innovation. There is always a problem, and there's always a solution. And it's I wouldn't class myself as a tech geek, but I find it fascinating. And a lot of the problems, or a lot of the solutions, are very human centered. And I think that's really, really interesting as well, because there's a bit of a purpose. Around what we're doing, and I know there's a corporate goal, that underpins and drives all of these activities and the investment. But I think most planners are very, very concerned around doing the right thing for employees, and the best ones will have that focus on the customer as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. When I first started out in workforce management, it was very much a case of workforce management was seen as a cost efficiency driver, and that's it. So it was all around either scaling a business to ensure that, like I say, got the right number of people, but it was also about how do we find efficiency gains to be able to scale it at an efficient rate.
Yeah.
I think now, though, the people are much more eyes open on the fact that things like employee satisfaction or employee motivation can actually have not only a big impact on the experience that they give to the customer, but also the bottom line as well. It's like if people go off sick or they decide to leave the business and the business has to replace and bear all the costs that are associated to that, it's something that actually isn't beneficial to do if you don't get that balance right. And I think because workforce management have their fingers on so many aspects that do influence people's lives outside of work and inside work, they have a big part to play in employee satisfaction, which is where I think I've definitely seen the biggest shift, at least over the last 5, maybe 10 years.
Yeah, I totally agree. And now more so in today's climate than ever.
Because of the pandemic, yeah.
100%. And I think there's an intrinsic link. If your staff are engaged and they feel respected, well regarded, looked after, there's an inclusive culture. I think it's a no-brainer. The level of service that your customer is going to receive is going to be first class. And I know we need elements of sort of training and continual development and all that sort of stuff. But I think current climate, that's a key driver. But I think also, companies via workforce management teams, they are starting to be cute, Doug. Funny enough, I was chatting to a chap earlier this week, and they are building into their schedules now, like what did he call it? A virtual water cooler 15-minute session where people just opt to click in, and it's just a very irrelevant conversation about whatever, and then they're out. And then you've got your flexible shift swaps and slides, making maybe even kind of that self-serve isn't anything new, but I think it's probably getting a much bigger focus now. And putting yourself available for overtime, making yourself available for voluntary offline time. I think all of these things, are going to be essential, and they've got to get it right, and there will be trial and error. And I think we've got a window of time. But I think if people see that there's efforts being made, we're not expecting it to work maybe out of the tin, but I think just the effort of saying, how about this? Factoring in sessions or creating sessions pre or post work around wellness and your mental health and all that stuff is, it's topical, and not because it's trendy, but because we're now all in a different landscape of work, where it is going to be hybrid, for want of a better word. People aren't going to be doing in the main the Monday to Friday gig, traveling and commuting. They're going to do their 5-day working week, but it's going to be, I'll do it where I can do it and when I can do it. Is kind of the nirvana for lots of people, isn't it?
Yeah. And we were touching upon this just before we hit record for this particular episode, but we were talking about how the market has changed quite drastically, at least in the last, this year, I guess, because of things easing up in terms of lockdown and how things have changed during lockdown. What are the type of roles that you're currently I know you've been really busy because it's been very hard to get you on this episode. What are the things that you're struggling with right now? Is it just general volume, or are the types of roles changed? Or
I'm not seeing a huge shift maybe in the types of roles. I think they're the same sorts of roles. I think it's the volume, Doug. I think we've come off the back of organisations downsizing maybe in the early pandemic days, when certainly lockdown was, we didn't know, did we, what to expect, and we didn't know how long it was going to last, and we didn't know how we were all going to cope and deal with it. So there was lots of trepidation around it. So I think we've had organisations downsizing, some of them really a knee-jerk reaction maybe potentially. We've had, I suppose, organisations having huge unforeseen spend. Which is get everybody out, get everybody at home, and get everybody equipped. So I suppose that, and there's some great success stories of how organisations have done wonderful work very, very quickly to mobilise the workforce. So I guess you're right. We've come out of that. I think everybody's feeling mentally stronger and certainly more optimistic. And I think we've got companies now thinking, well, actually, we need to play a little bit of catch up. We actually should be quite aggressive with our growth because we've been quite maybe stagnant for 2 years. And that could be, shareholder driven or, new markets. And you've mentioned before, companies have pivoted and done that successfully as well. So they've actually come out of lockdowns with maybe new market sectors, which is fantastic and really, really super interesting. So it's driven a lot of growth and not just in planning. I speak to peers and colleagues that recruit in different sectors, and we're all saying the same. It's bonkers. There's a lot of demand, and actually there isn't an awful lot of candidate movement, which indicatively is a huge challenge. But what it is also doing is increasing reward and pay for people in the marketplace. So it's it's a tough time. It's lovely to be busy, and I'm engaging with lots of people, and I've been fortunate enough to have a whole stack of new clients this calendar year, which has been great. It's great for my learning as well, new industry, new ways of working, new recruitment processes. But yeah, I don't remember a time where it's been so incredibly volatile. And I think we do need to kind of maybe take our breath a little bit and return to a little bit of common sense around pay scales here, because the bubble's going to burst at some point, and it's not going to taste nice for lots of people.
Could be interesting times in the next couple of years, when that bubble bursts. I've seen it before, so not in workforce management, interestingly, but we've definitely seen that type of pay growth before shoot up. I think I saw a survey that's something like 60-70% growth in terms of pay for workforce management roles. That was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But from what you're describing here, that sounds even in your experience is going beyond what you normally expect to be normal. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think why I find it so abnormal, Doug, is it's across the board. You'll always have periods of time and pockets of time where certain skills are very, very, very high in demand for a certain reason. But this is like a bit of a blanket across, the real-time landscape, scheduling, right, forecasting, general WFM administration. It has been a really, really challenging, probably started, I would say, Q4 2021, and it really hasn't slowed down. If anything, it's gathered a little bit more pace and urgency, which is great. If you're a candidate out in the market, you're pretty much you're able to sort of not write your own check, but you're able to negotiate from a pretty high table where maybe in the last decade you probably haven't been.
Yeah. And something that I was really keen to ask you, because I think you've got a unique perspective, given that you're not sort of directly in the workforce management, but you're very connected to it. Yeah. I know that especially right since Q4, but even before that, you speak to hundreds, thousands of workforce management professionals during your working week, and you must have had some really fascinating conversations, I would imagine, around, I don't know, workforce related trends or technologies. What have you heard that's been really interesting in the last 6 months? Have you seen any sort of emerging type trends that are coming out from those discussions?
Yeah, I think I touched on one briefly, the virtual water cooler chat.
Yeah.
And I am seeing a solid focus from a recruitment perspective around scheduling. And I'm hearing words when I'm taking my briefing on, we need a scheduler that can be creative. And I'm like, oh, okay, so what does creative mean from a scheduling perspective in your mind? Kind of what does that mean? And they said, well, we've definitely committed to a hybrid work policy, and we are focused on making sure there is that connection still. And a lot of advisors are full-time remote. So and we talked about the flexibility to make yourself available or unavailable for certain shifts and swapping it, but I think it's also trying to provide a degree of ownership as an advisor. I'm going to put up when I would like to work for the next month or 6 weeks or 12 weeks, whatever the rotational period is that schedules are released, and you may not get 100% of that, but actually you get a fair chunk of it. And I think immediately what that does is to say, well, actually, from a balance point of view, I've got a bit of a say, I've got a voice, and it's being listened to, and the other 10, 15, 20% I need to be flexible in return. And I think that works. It's a great trade-off, and it makes a really strong level of trust and connection. We talked a little bit also about sort of the mental health and wellness programs. And I think, yes, they're topical right now, but they're super important. So I'm seeing sessions being sort of built in, and not necessarily during work time, but maybe a little add-on at the end, or they're taking a little bit off and sort of saying, look, it's totally voluntary, it's optional, but this is what we're providing. But we would recommend everybody dials in, and it's a 15-minute, and it may prompt a conversation where actually, if any of these issues you're experiencing them yourself, or a colleague that is, let's get in front of it. Let's talk about it. And I think one thing probably the pandemic has done that's good is it's given us all a little bit more confidence to kind of say, I don't feel great. And it's not, and it's not bad to say that. And I think we've all, I've had a fair number of wobbles over the 2-year period, and I've reached out, and people have been absolutely wonderful, and people have unprompted sort of checked in with me, which is great. But I'm going a little bit off piste here, aren't we? We were talking about sort of innovation and what sort of stuff have I experienced in my role. So from a recruitment point of view, what's been really, really pleasing is we as recruiters can probably offer up our clients in more challenging locations some great candidates, because actually geography isn't so much a boundary anymore. The days of
is that commonplace in terms of the companies are now predominantly looking for remote workforce management people, or hybrid, or?
I don't think it's commonplace, Doug. I think it's been, back in the day, you get a brief and it would be, we want somebody that's a minute, maximum an hour away from our location, because obviously we don't want it to be an onerous thing. I think now, in tough locations where maybe the skill set isn't in abundance. I've had some lovely success stories last year with a client that historically, if they'd ring and say, we need some help, I'd inwardly groan, because I know it's going to be a grind for months and months and months. And quite frankly, it would be more luck than skill that we would find someone. So it was really more a test of perseverance and stamina rather than, kind of skill. But they were saying, look, we've been working remotely as a team for a year. It's been great. We need to grow. We just want the best people with the best approach, with the best sort of toolkit that fits in with what we're doing. And it doesn't matter where they are. And that's led me to recruit candidates that are in South Wales, on the South Coast, up in Edinburgh, the Northeast. And it's been brilliant. And in fact, I'm out with them all, I think, next Thursday evening. So it's going to be a really, really funny evening. I'm looking forward to it. But yeah, I mean, that's brilliant that now actually as a candidate, you're not limited to, well, my job search can only be within an hour of where I live. It can now be, well, actually, it can be pretty much anywhere. So there are some fully remote roles, but also with the hybrid model, that, traveling 2 days a week to maybe a location that you wouldn't want to do 5 days a week is also infinitely possible now, which it wasn't. So if there has been an uptick or an upside, I suppose it's made us all think a little bit more intelligently and creatively around how do we solve these problems. So that's been great. The other thing I've seen this year notably is the workforce planning function slowly, not maybe fully absorbing, but taking some element of responsibility for quality, training in particular, which I think is a little bit, for me, a bit of an innovation. I haven't really seen that before. And I can almost see that it would almost, in years to come, workforce management might be called something else, because I think you've got your deployment of people, you've got the analytics that support that, you've got the technology. But then, there's also an argument to say, well, we're doing all that good stuff at the top, but surely that information and that data is highly relevant in terms of how we further develop a training mechanism and a development plan for our staff. And also from a quality point of view, that links in with the training and development. But actually, we don't own the source of that data, but actually we're intrinsically involved in it. So I kind of see it maybe the umbrella that keeps all this stuff from getting wet is getting a little bit bigger, which I think is a good thing.
It's a foundational piece. I mean, planning is a foundational piece for any part of the organisation, but I think in terms of the workforce management side and the it's so connected to different parts of the business. It's very easy to make a business case to bring them closer together. It's definitely a passion for me where I've seen some really great successes in some organisations that have taken the remit of workforce management beyond the traditional to focus on things like you mentioned there, workforce optimization or connected to the training optimization. You think about the ramps up and ramps down, or the ramps up highly impact training, for example, in terms of when they need to do what resources they need. Being in a planned state actually takes a training department to the next level.
Yeah.
The same goes for things like elements of the P&L as well, which I think I'm seeing more of as well. If you have a BPO network, having that connected to your workforce management function is almost critical.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think there is huge amounts of value that we can and our people are taking that are beyond that traditional view of it's just about either cost efficiency or even just putting bums in the right places and the right seats. It's gone beyond that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there'll always be an element, you do things correctly and you innovate, there's always going to be economies of scale and there's going to be efficiencies that are a byproduct of that. I think, long gone are the days where it's almost, well, how do we strip 3, 4, 5% of what is typically the biggest cost in an operation, isn't it? Is how do we strip that out but still maintain service level? I think it's a reversed engineered now, which is kind of how do we do things better? And what does that result in? And how do we look after our people on that journey that are ultimately responsible for the CX element? And customer is king, and we're all customers, aren't we? And I know my behaviour and how I interact is very, very different. I'm quite happy to leave a live chat open on one of my screens and carry on working and do that sort of stuff. And I'll do that whenever I like because I can, right?
Yeah.
The behaviour patterns are interesting, and I don't envy the current tranche of forecasters that have got the last 2 years of data to muck around because it's an absolute mess, isn't it?
It's not a good indicator of the future, that's for sure. Yeah, I think my team have pretty much given up the ghost and just we're just taking it day by day at the moment. So I know how that feels. Ian, I'm conscious of time, and I could probably talk to you for at least the rest of the day, but unfortunately we both have things that we need to get onto. But before we close this for today, I'm asking the same question for everyone that comes on as a guest for this episode, because I think it's been super interesting to hear the different replies that I've had from various different people. I'm really interested in asking you this as well. What are the 3 people that have been the most influential to you and why? Into your career to date, or even in your personal life as well, if you want.
Yeah, well, I knew this question was coming, and I probably should have given it a little bit more thought. I think it's the toughest question you've asked. And 3, wow, I mean, I don't know, there's so many. So I suppose for me personally, my father is probably one of them. Unfortunately, he passed away at a very, very young age. Actually, he was 47. I was in my very, very early 20s. So I suppose in terms of inspiration, I think what I've definitely taken away is he was a first generation immigrant, really. So came to this country, and he was a manual worker, but he was very focused. He was tremendous fun, really lively, but he had an incredible work ethic, and he loved solving problems. And I think I've probably taken something away from that in terms of resilience, which I think every single recruiter needs to have, and having almost, and I don't know whether this is a good thing, a bit of a dogged determination to always get the right result. And you don't always do that, but I think how you apply yourself to at least try is really important. And family are everybody's inspiration. I get that, and I've got 2 kids, and I'm super proud of them, and they're academically in a different level than I am. But interestingly, both of them are very determined and very focused, which I'd like to think is something that I've passed down to them. So
I could testify to that. About you, at least, anyway. Not about your kids, but yeah.
Thank you. And I suppose I've been lucky enough. I've worked with lots of great recruiters, and I suppose my very first job in recruitment The manager there was super supportive, really invested time, I suppose, in teaching me the building blocks and what good behaviour looked like. And he was pretty tough as well, so he had very high standards. So I suppose that would be one. And I've had colleagues that have been great, that have really applied themselves, who have been really focused and determined. They've been a pleasure to work with, and it's been lovely to work amongst people and hopefully share a little bit of knowledge that's taken them maybe to the next level. It's a tough question, Doug. I should be throwing and spitting names at you, shouldn't I? I'm really struggling, with this one. So hopefully that's a fudged answer that's acceptable.
I'll take it.
Thank God.
I'll put you out of your misery. Well, Ian, we are out of time, but huge thanks for setting aside the time in the middle of your own hyper-growth recruitment surge that you're currently undertaking. Best of luck with that. You're rock star. You've some super interesting insights, which I'm sure lots of our listeners are really going to enjoy. I certainly have taken some stuff away already. Ian, thank you. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure. Good to catch up as always. And I'm sure we'll do something again very, very soon.
Thanks, Ian.
Thank you for listening to WeWFM. This podcast is made and produced by André Leitão, Bilge Hentolun, Doug Carsteton, Gonçalo Gomes, and Kim Paz. If you like this show, don't forget to share it with your friends and colleagues. Visit our website, wewfm.com, to find more exclusive interviews and WFM content. See you next time. All rights reserved.